Hey there, welcome to Funlearn Talks, the podcast where we break down business, technology, and history into stories that sparks your mind and makes you smarter. I'm Adi, and we explore ideas that shape the world, from empires and entrepreneurs to code and culture. If you love connecting dots and asking why things are the way they are, you're in the right place. Let's get started with today's story.
Imagine standing in the bustling heart of Paris in the late 1700s, the air thick with the tension of imminent change. The French Revolution, a pivotal moment that would influence the entire continent, was about to erupt. Now, why did France, the cultural beacon and most powerful nation in Europe, descend into revolution? Let's unravel the complex web that led to the French Revolution. France's economy was a ticking time bomb. Up until the 1770s, life was improving, people were making a decent living, and the economy was growing. But suddenly, the gears of economic growth began to grind to a halt. The year 1778 marked the beginning of an agricultural slump that spiraled into a severe recession by 1787 to 1789. Around this time, food shortages became severe, unemployment surged by 50%, wheat prices soared, and ordinary folks were spending 80% of their earnings just on bread. Imagine the frustration and desperation. Meanwhile, as people struggled, the nobility scrambled to maintain their lavish lifestyles. They clung to old feudal privileges and monopolized official roles, blocking the emerging middle class of professionals and businessmen from these positions. This class found themselves not only economically suffocated, but also politically marginalized. Let's pause for a second to consider the political atmosphere. France was burdened with a clunky bureaucracy and a lack of representative structures, such as a parliament. This meant that governance heavily depended on the character of the king. Unfortunately, Louis XVI, though well-meaning, was seen as weak-willed. The powerful regional courts, or parlements, often resisted the king's decrees, creating a stalemate that further stalled any governmental progress. Indeed, during this era, the seeds of revolutionary thought were being sown by philosophers like Montesquieu, Voltaire, and Rousseau, who championed ideas of liberty and the sovereignty of the people. Interestingly, even the parlements, which were essentially conservative bodies protecting noble interests, adopted this revolutionary language to undermine the monarchy and gain popular support. The irony was palpable. As the financial strain tightened, something had to give. Alexis de Tocqueville, a French political thinker, once noted, "The most dangerous moment for a bad government is generally that in which it sets about reform." With royal coffers depleted by years of war and extravagant spending, by 1788, a staggering 50% of the state's budget went just to manage debts. This financial quagmire forced the monarchy to call the Estates General, a general assembly representing various social estates after nearly a century. This is where things take a turn. As the Estates General convened, grievances aired, and dissent spread, the stage was set for a full-blown revolution. The financial crisis, a flailing economy, an inept monarchy, and the provocative ideas of liberty and equality. All these factors brewed together to ignite the profound transformation that was the French Revolution. The revolution was not merely a spontaneous eruption, but a series of cascading events and structural weaknesses that finally overwhelmed the old order. Remember, history often unfolds not just in moments of decisive action, but within the slow grind of underlying forces. And so, the French Revolution teaches us about the power of economic pressures, the dangers of political stagnation, and the unstoppable force of new ideas reshaping societies. As we reflect on this monumental era, let's ponder the enduring impacts of those volatile years and consider the ways in which they continue to influence our modern understanding of liberty, equality, and the essence of what it means to govern. As we journey into the heart of the pivotal moments leading to the French Revolution, it's fascinating to see how changes in taxation and governance set the stage for monumental shifts. In 1786, the government announced a new land tax plan that sought to remove exemptions and streamline collection. This was complemented by a stamp duty on all official documents, all part of an effort to bolster economic growth. Yet, as reforms were discussed, voices of opposition emerged, branding themselves as the patriot parties. They decried royal excess and despotism, leading to significant modifications by 1788. The culmination of their protests resulted in the king ceding to two major demands in 1789. the appointment of the controversial Necker as finance minister, and the calling of the Estates General, a decision that would reawaken a political assembly dormant since 1614. Now, here's where the plot thickens. If the Estates General were structured as they had been in 1614, the aristocracy would have easily held sway. Originally, the clergy, aristocracy, and commoners each had 300 representatives, but crucially, they voted as blocks, not as individuals. This setup was poised to perpetuate aristocratic dominance. However, 1789 brought a daring change. Under pressure, before the elections, the king and Necker conceded to doubling the representatives of the Third Estate, the commoners boosting their numbers to 600. This shift was influenced by powerful arguments from figures like the Abbé Sieyès in his influential pamphlet, What is the Third Estate? Recognizing the Third Estate as a legitimate voice of the nation, the king inadvertently set the stage for a greater movement. The newly emboldened Third Estate declared itself the National Assembly on June 17th, symbolizing a significant pivot towards diminishing royal authority and challenging entrenched privileges. Imagine the scene on June 20th, locked out from their usual meeting place. Members of this assembly gathered in a nearby tennis court, an impromptu meeting spot that would host one of the revolution's defining moments. There, they swore an oath not to dissolve until they had crafted a constitution that would curb the governmental powers, a brave commitment in the face of royal opposition. The king could no longer ignore the shifting tides and was compelled to order other delegates to join the National Assembly, signaling a softening of his stance in response to the burgeoning power of the Third Estate and escalating tensions in Paris. And tensions were indeed rising. By the summer of 1789, the lower-class frustrations in Paris, long simmering, began to boil over. Artisans and workers, collectively known as sans-culottes, were actively dismantling the city's custom barriers and arming themselves, an ominous sign of the escalating conflict. When Necker was dismissed on July 11th and replaced with a royal favorite, panic spread through the streets, fueled by rumors of a regal counterstrike backed by foreign troops. This brings us to a day etched in the annals of history, July 14th, the storming of the Bastille. Driven by a need for gunpowder, the sans-culottes attacked and seized the fortress, a potent symbol of royal authority. This act of defiance echoed across France, inspiring other cities to establish their own National Guard units, following Paris's revolutionary lead. What's surprising is the rapid spread of revolutionary fervor from a local protest to a national movement, illustrating how deeply the seeds of discontent were planted across the various strata of French society. Each of these events, from the establishment of new taxes to the storming of the Bastille, were not just isolated incidents, but links in a chain that would eventually pull down an ancient regime. Let's keep going and see how these dramatic events continue to unfold and reshape not just France, but the very ideas of governance and power. In the tumultuous summer of 1789, known as the Great Fear, a wave of peasant revolts swept through France. Picture this. Desperate peasants, fearing a royal aristocratic counterattack following Necker's restoration, took matters into their own hands. They attacked food convoys, set chateaux ablaze, and destroyed records of feudal dues. It was a rebellion fueled by desperation and fear, emotions that were driving France closer to anarchy than anyone had seen. Now, while chaos reigned in the countryside, the National Assembly was facing its own pivotal moment on August the 4th. It was a scene that could rival any dramatic performance. They called it the Saint Bartholomew of privilege. One by one, representatives from the aristocracy, clergy, and other privileged groups stood up and renounced their rights and privileges. It was an astonishing act of self-stripping that aimed to placate the raging storm outside. Just a few weeks later, on August 26th, the National Assembly took a bold step further by adopting the Declaration of the Rights of Man. This document was revolutionary, affirming the natural liberty and equality of all men and guaranteeing individual rights. Although it didn't address economic equality or universal suffrage, and property was still held as a sacred and inviolable right, it set a profound new direction by confirming the abolishment of feudal privileges and curbing the king's powers. Interestingly, those who lost their privileges were even promised compensation. As if the political landscape wasn't tumultuous enough, the October days brought another twist. On October 5th, an outraged crowd of women, alongside 20,000 National Guardsmen led by Lafayette, marched to Versailles. Their demand was audacious. The royal family had to move from Versailles to Paris, a symbolic act sealing the monarchy's subjugation to the will of the people. This pivotal event paved the way for the Constituent Assembly, now rebranded from merely a gathering of representatives to a body tasked with creating a new constitution. It was a crucible moment. Although there were no Republicans, debates swirled around the future of the monarchy. The Progressives, led by Sieyès, and the English Party, led by Mirabeau, clashed. Yet it was the Progressives' vision that prevailed, imposing strict limits on the monarchy's powers. In this newly forming democracy, the legislative landscape was dramatically reconfigured. The concept of a bicameral system was tossed aside, favoring a legislative assembly where deputies needed a certain property status to be elected by the active citizens, excluding about 1.5 million passive citizens who lacked sufficient property and could not vote. On a more administrative level, the assembly redefined local governance by establishing a system of communes with elected officials right down to the grassroots level. Legal tribunals were overhauled too. The old parlements were out, replaced by a modern judiciary system with elected judges. And not forgetting the economy, free trade was championed, standardization of weights and measures implemented, and guild regulations scrapped. However, this reformist zeal also saw the prohibition of workers' unions, a decision reflective of the upper middle class bias of the assembly. One of the most controversial reforms was the civil constitution of the clergy in July 1790, making the clergy elected and paid state officials. The Pope's vehement condemnation of this and the confiscation of church lands stirred significant unrest, especially in devout regions like the ultra-Catholic La Vendée. All these reforms, from the sweeping social changes to the restructuring of political and legal frameworks, pinpoint to an era that was anything but peaceful, but one that was unmistakably revolutionary. The transformation was profound, setting France on a path that would radically alter not just the nation, but influence the entire world. As we recount these pivotal moments, it's clear that each step taken by the Assembly, every declaration, and every decree was a thread in the new tapestry of French society. From violent upheavals to significant legislative milestones, the journey through these years was shaping a new political and social order, fundamentally challenging centuries of monarchical rule and aristocratic privilege. Stay tuned as we delve further into the consequences of these revolutionary changes, both the expected and the unintended. That's it for today's episode on Funlearn Talks, where stories from business, technology, and history keep your curiosity alive. If you enjoyed the journey, make sure to follow, rate, or share it with a fellow curious mind. And hey, we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment or connect with us online. I'm Adi, and I'll catch you next time, right here on Funlearn Talks. Until then, keep learning, keep wondering.